Right now, there's something you're supposed to be doing. You know exactly what it is. It's been on the list for days, maybe weeks, and instead of doing it, you're here. Good. Because here's what nobody tells you about that task. Our species is far older than the way we work. And for almost all of that time, nobody had an inbox, a quarterly target, or a list designed to outlive the daylight. Work started. Work ended. The day was done. The list that never finishes? That's new. One of the biggest turns began about 12,000 years ago. Hold on to that number, because part of the reason you can't get anything done isn't laziness. It isn't your phone. It isn't even you. It's a brain built for a different deal. And science can show you what happened when the deal changed. Start where someone finally wrote the numbers down. July 1964. A camp called Dobe at a Kalahari waterhole. An anthropologist named Richard Lee is keeping a diary. Not of feelings, of hours. For 4 weeks, he records what every adult actually does. Who works, who rests, who walks out with a bow, and when. The result started arguments that still haven't ended. The adults of Dobe spent about 2.5 days a week getting food. 2.5 days. 12 to 19 hours a week hunting and gathering the food they needed. The hardest working man in the whole camp peaked at 32 hours in a week. And before you object, yes, there's an asterisk. Lee's diary covered 1 month in a single season. Count tool making, cooking, firewood, water, the rest of subsistence work, and the men's week fills out to something like 44 hours. There were hungry seasons. This was no effortless paradise. But look at the shape of those hours. A woman gathers enough in 1 day to feed her family for 3 days. A man hunts hard for a week, then not at all for 2 or 3. Work came in bursts, and every burst had an ending. The food came home, and the work was done. Anthropologists have a name for worlds like that. Immediate return. You work today. It pays today. Little is stored for later. Almost nothing you do this week works like that. Not every foraging society worked this way. But the pattern is ancient. So what does a brain built around shorter returns do all day? In 2015, researchers put that question on a sensor. 28 adults in northern Tanzania, Hadza communities, hunters and foragers by livelihood, wore motion trackers strapped to the thigh for 8 days straight. David Reichlin and his colleagues measured one number. How much of the waking day is spent without standing or walking? The answer, 9.9 hours. 9.9 hours a day. That is close to what industrial populations log sitting. 9 hours in the United States. A little more in the Netherlands. Same species. Nearly the same hours. No office in sight. Resting for long stretches isn't a uniquely modern failure. It's what rest can look like outside an industrial economy. But the sensors caught a twist. The Hadza weren't resting in chairs. They squatted. They knelt. Together, those postures filled nearly a third of their rest. And in a squat, leg muscles stayed more active than they do in a chair. The researchers' hypothesis, and they are careful to call it that, is that our bodies expect some rest with the muscles half on. The chair is the newcomer, not the resting. The posture, not the rest, may be the mismatch. In a world where food could run short, wasting energy was expensive. Evolution rewards efficiency, not effort for effort's sake. And modern measurements show how tightly the body can manage its budget. Track total energy across 5 countries, 332 adults. And past a moderate point, but extra activity moves the daily burn far less than you'd expect. Later work puts average compensation near 28%. The body guards its budget like a ledger. That doesn't prove procrastination is calorie saving. It does show that the body doesn't spend energy like an open tap. Then, patience should be easy for us, shouldn't it? In 2007, at a primate research center in Leipzig, a chimpanzee sat across from a very simple choice. 2 pieces of food right now. Or 6 pieces for waiting 2 minutes. Alexandra Rosati and her colleagues ran the same kind of choice on people. Same delay. Real waiting, real food. The chimpanzees held out for the bigger reward on nearly 72% of their trials. The humans? 19%. 72 against 19. Sit with that for a second. On the same test, the chimpanzee outweighted the human. Patience, the thing your teachers called a virtue, didn't simply grow as brains grew. Then the researchers changed one thing. They paid people in money. 20 cents now, or 60 cents in 2 minutes. Suddenly, humans waited on more than half the trials. Nearly triple. Patience isn't one fixed trait. It's tuned to the kind of reward. For food in this experiment, humans took now over later far more often. For abstract tokens that promise a later, they learned to wait. Small monkeys, in separate studies, tap out in seconds. Now, hold your own week up against that machinery. Your brain loves what pays now. Modern work keeps billing later. So here's the question that should worry you. What happens when an entire way of life starts paying much more in later? One enormous shift begins about 12,000 years ago. Around then, in a warming world, some communities began relying more on cultivation, and eventually farming. 12,000 years. Farming spread and arose independently elsewhere, across thousands of years. And farming pays, but it pays in later. Seed in the ground now, bread in the autumn, maybe. For more and more people, work became delayed return, and the payoff horizon stretched. You'd think the trade at least bought free time. Researchers measured that too, among Agta communities in the Philippines. 10 camps, some mostly foraged, some farmed more. The more a camp farmed, the less leisure its people had. Mostly the women's. The scientists themselves warn, don't project one people onto prehistory, but within that one comparison, the direction of the trade is hard to miss. Then the modern world set the dial to now for everything else, and our attention may still carry older priorities. In a 2007 lab study, people spotted a change to an animal in a scene more than a second, faster than a change to a vehicle, even though vehicles are modern dangers we've trained on for years. The original team called it an ancient animal monitoring bias. Later experiments challenged that explanation. But the modern attention problem didn't disappear. Gloria Mark has measured what that costs. In the early 2000s, office workers stayed on one screen about 2.5 minutes. In her later measurements, 47 seconds, 47 seconds, and when her lab forced interruptions on working people, they finished faster and paid for it in measured stress. None of this means your brain is broken. It means the workday keeps asking it to switch. Which leaves one myth standing. The biggest one. The one with your name on it. Lazy. That's the story you tell about the unstarted task. Research has spent decades dismantling that explanation. Piers Steele compiled 691 correlations on procrastination. Among the strongest predictors were impulsiveness and how bad the task feels. Up to 95% of college students procrastinate. Estimates put chronic procrastination at 1 adult in 5 or 6. That is not a character flaw, that's a population. So what is it? Fuskia Siroa and Timothy Feichel gave one of the clearest answers. Procrastination often works as mood repair. The task feels bad. Escaping it feels good, right now. We give in to feel good, and the bill goes to the future. In that account, the consequences land on the future self. And the future self is farther away than you think. One small imaging study watched people judge their future selves. A self-related brain region dimmed when they thought about the future self. The bigger that current-to-future gap, the more sharply people discounted future rewards. Early findings, 18 people. Intriguing, but small. And imagining tomorrow itself is a remarkable trick. Mental time travel. Pre-living an event that hasn't happened yet isn't ours alone. Other animals show pieces of foresight too. Humans turn that trick into plans, promises, deadlines, entire lives. Now, put together the picture. A body built to bank effort. Reward system sensitive to what pays now. Attention easy to pull toward what matters right now. In a world where work can stay unfinished for months, that brain isn't failing at your to-do list. It's reading it and asking an older question. What here pays today? Lazy was never the whole story. The finish line started moving 12,000 years ago. And the modern world keeps moving it farther. Here's the part worth keeping. In many foraging lives, as best we can tell, the day's work could actually end. The food came home. The fire was lit. Done was real. Farming stretched done across seasons, 12,000 years ago, one seed at a time. And modern work built lists that outlive every day you give them. Maybe that's why crossing off one small thing feels so unreasonably good. It's the oldest kind of reward. Something unfinished becoming done. Our ancestors never met an inbox, but the evening they worked toward is still in you, waiting at the bottom of every list. And the strangest part is that brains this old built the modern world anyway. Which is where we'll go next.